If you've ever taken a DNA test like 23andMe, you're more likely to be aware that your genes may impact your long-term health. Are you predisposed to type 2 diabetes, kidney stones, or Parkinson's disease? Are you more likely to suffer from sleep apnea or acne? Does your pee smell after you eat asparagus? If you know, you know. But did you know your genes can also impact how well your body responds to certain medication? It's why the same drug might work differently in two different people, even two full siblings. Our genetic variation determines so much more than just our eye color, hair color, or how we look. And the same is true for our pets. As veterinarians, the more we know about your pet's unique genetic makeup, the easier it is to make decisions about their health care. Things like breeding. If your dog carries a gene for a particular disease, we might recommend spaying or neutering your dog, or at very least, breeding it to a dog that doesn't carry that same disease-causing mutation. Knowing their genetic makeup can help us prevent and detect disease. If we knew your cat was predisposed to a certain type of cancer, we might recommend additional early screening tests to try and catch those abnormalities before they grow more deadly. And it can also change what medicines we prescribe or what doses we recommend, because your cat's genes can affect how it metabolizes drugs or responds to certain types of medication. What I've just described is called personalized medicine, an emerging field of human and veterinary medicine where doctors can make better decisions based on an individual's genetic makeup. Since the Human Genome Project was launched in 1988, researchers have sequenced more than 92% of the human genome, and we've learned so much about our genetic makeup and how that may affect our health. But there's still so much to learn about our pets. To date, our laboratory has helped sequence more than 400 dogs and 260 cat whole genomes, contributing to research consortiums that aid projects around the globe. My goal as a clinician and researcher is to use that information to discover how your pet's genes affect their health. It's a bit like searching for a needle in a haystack. Cats have 38 chromosomes and more than 20,000 known genes. But that's kind of part of what makes cats special. Cats have remarkably similar genomes to us. Aside from primates, cats and dogs are about as similar to humans as you can get. This means that what we learn about cats and the medicines we develop as a result just might help humans too. I got into this field of personalized medicine because of my background in cardiology and exercise physiology. I first completed my bachelor's degree in animal science, where I worked in a lab studying animal athletes like racehorses and sled dogs. We were trying to understand what made them such amazing athletes. And part of that is their cardiovascular strength, how much blood they pump in a minute and how efficiently they do it. It was from there I went on to vet school and pursued specialty training in cardiology, and then ultimately obtained my PhD in vet genetics. I got hooked with initial studies of cardiovascular disease in dogs, specifically a disease called arrhythmogenic right ventricular cardiomyopathy in boxer dogs. This disease, known as ARVC, is interesting because it's a problem for humans too. It's one of the reasons you see automatic defibrillators on the sidelines of sporting events and hanging on the walls of gymnasiums. Young athletes that have this condition can die suddenly, and that's really devastating. The tools we had back when I first became interested in cardiac genetics, though, were pretty rudimentary. As a vet student, I was manually screening genes one at a time for possible mutations to look for differences between dogs that had and did not have arrhythmogenic cardiomyopathy. Now, more than 15 years later, that same laboratory that I trained in has identified 2 different mutations and subsequently genetic tests for arrhythmogenic cardiomyopathy in boxers. Boxer breeders today use these tests to avoid breeding or selling dogs with a high risk of developing this devastating disease. But ARVC is just one disease example, and there are thousands of different mutations in cats and dogs that could lead to problems down the road. That's where my current research comes in. We take the DNA and ultimately the genomes from pet patients that come into our hospital, chunk them up into many little pieces and generate sequence that then gets reassembled. We compare that DNA sequence to what a normal dog or cat genome should look like, something we've learned from all of our previous work and the publicly available work of many of our colleagues. Wherever it doesn't match up to those normal sequences means that there's variation or mutation. Now, to be clear, not all variations or mutations are bad. It just means that the gene is different than expected in those collection of normal samples. And that's where statistics and more research really comes to play. Statistics helps us figure out across many pets which of the mutations we see are statistically significant and actually associated with a disease or a trait. We then follow up on that science and actually prove what each specific mutation is doing. Feline hypertrophic cardiomyopathy is another disease that's near and dear to my heart. It's the most common heart disease we diagnose in cats. In fact, 1 in 7 cats is diagnosed with HCM, and 1 in 500 people also diagnosed with HCM. Hypertrophic cardiomyopathy causes the muscle of our hearts to thicken, making it difficult for that muscle to relax and for blood to fill the chamber. It can lead to things like congestive heart failure, blood clot formation, and even sudden death. Some cat breeds like Maine Coon cats, ragdolls, and Sphinx are predisposed to HCM because of their genetic makeup. And if we compare the genes of cats with HCM to the normal cat genome, we'll find many differences. The question is, which of these differences really matter and which don't? Researchers have already figured this out for most Maine Coon cats, ragdolls, and Sphinx, as these breeds all have discovered HCM-causing mutations that we test for. But what about all the other cats? The mixed breed cats that have a 1 in 7 chance of developing this deadly disease. Once we know more about which mutations matter, we can come up with better genetic tests to detect HCM in cats and perhaps try to minimize this disease through selective breeding programs. And perhaps even more important is the identification of mutations that serve as novel drug targets. Those drug targets aim to limit the nasty disease outcomes of HCM. We're working really hard in this area now with new classes of drugs that impact known HCM-causing genes specifically. This is all because we now better understand parts of the genome in cats and humans with hypertrophic cardiomyopathy. This is one place where pharmacogenetics comes in. Pharmacogenetics is a fancy word for an exciting field where we customize a person or pet's medical treatment based on their genes. A cool example of that is anticoagulants. These are drugs prescribed to prevent your blood from clotting or coagulating. Blood clots are one of the most devastating and fatal problems for cats with hypertrophic cardiomyopathy. If we can figure out a better way to treat blood clots in cats, it doesn't solve HCM altogether, but it sure helps. Here's how it works. Some people and cats with HCM are what we might call non-responders, meaning that you can give them a drug, but the cat's body either won't metabolize it correctly or the drug doesn't work appropriately at its receptor. So those cats get less or no benefit from the drug itself. We already know about a few genes and specific mutations that affect whether a cat can respond properly to the most commonly prescribed anticoagulant known as clopidogrel. And with this knowledge, we can use the cat's simple DNA test to decide if we should select different, less commonly used drugs to get the same result of reduced blood clot formation. In the future, my ultimate hope is that your veterinarian will swab your kitten at their first kitten visit and put its genetic makeup on file, a 23 and meow, if you will. That way, they'll know down the road which drugs do and don't work for your cat. I hope that by the time we have all this information, we've learned all kinds of specific mutations that have specific effects on commonly used medications. Not only will that eliminate the stress and frustration of multiple vet trips when a medication isn't working, but it means that simple tests could help your cat live a longer and happier life. But for now, here's what you can do with this information. If you're thinking of getting a pet, especially one with a lot of known genetic predispositions, like Maine Coons, Boxer dogs, German Shepherds, or Golden Retrievers, ask your veterinarian about genetic testing and use this information as you're selecting your pet. The most reputable breeders will also be up to date on the relevant testing for their specific breed. If you're thinking of getting a pet and you're not committed to a specific breed, consider rescuing a good old-fashioned mutt from your local shelter. Many purebred cats and dogs come from a really small gene pool. That means less genetic diversity and greater risk of disease-causing genetic mutations that pile up. If your pet's been diagnosed with a likely inherited disease, look for clinical trials for that disease. Reach out to your local veterinary university clinical trial center or browse the Morris Animal Foundation study pages online. Clinical trials are a really great way for you to help researchers learn more about a disease, to better prevent that disease or better treat it in the future. These trials also cover a great deal of veterinary expenses that may come along with the treatment of that disease. Ask your veterinarian how genetic testing may help your pet at their next examination. This is a rapidly changing field, and you might be surprised by how that answer changes from year to year. And finally, on behalf of all cats and cat veterinarians out there, thank you so much for your interest in this research. I can't wait to share more with you as our important work continues.